He thinks the diamond on my finger is a permanent vow. But he forgets it is the only asset I kept when I walked away. Julian sold my intellect for $1.2 billion, toasting his mistress at our anniversary party while dismissing me as a housewife with a hobby. He made one fatal error. He sold the vehicle. But the ignition key lies in my heartbeat, and when my heart stops beating for him, his empire dies. My name is Helena Briarwood, though for the last 10 years, the world has largely known me only as the decorative silence standing just behind the brilliance of Julian Thorpe. I stood in the shadowed periphery of the grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, a glass of untouched sparkling water in my hand, watching my husband ascend the stage. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns. A congregation of New York's financial elite gathered to worship at the altar of new money. The crystal chandeliers overhead cast a fractured, glittering light that seemed to dance exclusively for him. Julian looked impeccable. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, hugging his broad shoulders, and his smile was that practiced, dazzling expression that had charmed venture capitalists and board members alike. It was the smile of a man who believed he had already won the war. The microphone screeched briefly before settling into a hum as Julian raised a hand, silencing the murmuring crowd. He commanded the room with an ease that always made my stomach churn with a mixture of old affection and new, icy dread. He began to speak, his voice resonating with that deep, baritone confidence that could sell ice to a polar explorer. He was announcing the impossible. He was announcing the historical merger between our company, Synthetics Global, and the Vanguard Investment Fund. He paused for dramatic effect before dropping the number that made the room gasp collectively. $1.2 billion. The figure hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating. $1.2 billion to the people in this room. It was a score, a victory lap, a validation of Julian's genius. To me, it was a price tag on my soul. I watched him bask in the applause, accepting the handshakes and the backslaps from men who would have stepped over his dying body for a quarter of that sum. The applause was thunderous, a physical force that vibrated against my chest, but my mind was drifting, pulled away from the gold-leafed opulence of the plaza, back to a place much darker and far less glamorous. I remembered the basement. It was a damp, windowless box in Queens where the heater rattled like a dying lung and the smell of mildew was a permanent roommate. That was where Synthetics Global was actually born. It was not born in a boardroom or over a steak dinner. It was born in the blue light of 3 second-hand monitors while I sat wrapped in a blanket, my fingers flying across a sticky keyboard, coding until my eyes burned and my vision blurred. I remembered the nights I went without sleep, surviving on instant coffee and sheer will, building the architecture of a system that would revolutionize high-frequency trading. And I remembered Julian. I remembered him sleeping on the couch upstairs, or coming down only to ask if the prototype was ready for him to show to a potential angel investor. He was the face. That was what we had agreed upon. I was the architect, and he was the storefront. But looking at him now, bathed in the golden light of success, I realized that the storefront had convinced itself it was the entire building. A hand touched my arm, breaking my trance. The touch was light, but possessed a claw-like quality that I recognized instantly. I turned to see Victoria Thorpe, my mother-in-law, and the chairwoman of the board. She was wearing a silver gown that cost more than my father made in a year, and her face was a mask of aggressive preservation. Her eyes scanned me, looking for a flaw, a loose thread, a hair out of place. "You look lovely." "Helena," she said, though the tone suggested she was surprised I had managed to dress myself. "You have done such a wonderful job tonight. It is not easy, I know. Standing back and letting the men handle the heavy lifting, you have completed your role as the support system perfectly." Her words were precise little daggers. Completed your role, past tense. I looked at her, searching for a shred of maternal warmth, but found only the cold calculation of a woman who viewed family members as assets or liabilities. To her, I was a depreciating asset, I had served my purpose, I had written the code, I had built the product, and now I was merely the woman standing next to the check. Thank you. Victoria, I said, my voice steady. I suppose every empire needs a foundation, even if it gets buried under the marble. She blinked, not expecting the bite, but before she could respond, Julian's voice boomed through the speakers again, and none of this, absolutely none of this, would be possible without the person who has been by my side through the darkest days. Julian said, turning his gaze toward my corner. The spotlight swung violently across the room, blinding me, pinning me against the wall like a moth in a collection box. Please welcome my wife, Helena. The applause surged again. This was it, the public acknowledgement. For a split second, a foolish, naive part of me thought he might actually tell the truth. Maybe he would admit that the core algorithm, the thing Vanguard was paying $1.2 billion for, was mine. I walked toward the stage, my legs moving on autopilot. I ascended the stairs, and Julian reached out, taking my hand. His palm was warm, but his grip was tight, bordering on painful. He pulled me to the center of the stage, wrapping an arm around my waist. It felt less like an embrace and more like a restraint. He looked down at me, his eyes glittering with a strange, hard light. He smiled for the cameras flashing below us. But when he spoke, he did not look at me. He looked out at the sea of investors and sharks. Helena has been my rock, Julian declared. But the pressure of this industry, the weight of building a unicorn from scratch, takes a toll. It is with a heavy heart, but also with great love, that I announce Helena will be stepping down from her ceremonial role at Synthetics Global, effective immediately. The room went quiet. The air left my lungs. Ceremonial role. She will be taking a much-needed retirement to focus on her health. Julian continued, his voice dropping to a somber, sympathetic register that made my skin crawl. We have all seen the strain she has been under. Her mental health is our priority right now, and I want to ensure she gets the best care possible at a private facility in Switzerland. He was doing it. He was doing it right in front of 500 witnesses. He was painting me as unstable, as a fragile little wife who cracked under pressure, effectively neutralizing me before I could ever claim ownership of my work. If I spoke up now, I would just look like the hysterical woman he was describing. It was a masterstroke of cruelty. Before I could even process the magnitude of the lie, a man stepped out from the wings of the stage. It was Julian's personal lawyer, a man named Sterling, who had the personality of a wet shark. He did not smile. He walked right up to us in the middle of the stage, hidden partially by the podium from the main crowd, and thrust a blue folder into my hands. For your signature, Mrs. Thorpe, Sterling whispered, his voice dry as dust. I looked down. It was not a thank you card. The top document was a divorce filing, citing irreconcilable differences and my instability. Beneath it was a formal termination of employment for cause. Citing incompetence and inability to perform duties, he was firing me from the company I built and divorcing me in the same breath, all while the audience applauded his benevolence in sending me to rehab. I looked up at Julian. He was not looking at me. He was looking past me, toward the VIP table near the front. My gaze followed him. There, sitting with a glass of champagne raised in a silent toast, was a woman I recognized. She was 22, perhaps 23. She was the new marketing intern Julian had hired 3 months ago. She was beautiful in a vapid, hungry sort of way, but it was not her face that stopped my heart. It was her neck. Resting against her collarbone was a necklace. It was a heavy, antique sapphire pendant surrounded by diamonds. It was the Thorpe family heirloom. It was the necklace Julian had shown me 5 years ago, the one he had sworn he was saving for our 10-year anniversary. He had told me it was in a safety deposit box, waiting for the right moment. The right moment was apparently tonight, but not for me. The final tumbler in the lock of my heart clicked into place. The grief I expected to feel did not come. The rage I thought would consume me did not ignite. Instead, a profound, glacial cold settled over my entire being. It was a clarity so sharp it felt like a physical weapon. I looked at the papers in my hand. I looked at the pen Sterling was offering me. They expected a scene. They expected tears. They expected me to scream or faint or beg. Victoria was watching from the front row. Her lips pursed in anticipation of my humiliation. Julian was tense, his muscles coiled, ready to play the grieving husband comforting his manic wife. I took the pen. My hand did not shake. I did not look at the cameras. I placed the folder on the surface of the podium. With a smooth, deliberate motion, I signed the divorce papers. Then, I flipped the page and signed the termination agreement. I signed away my title. I signed away my claims to the stock. I signed away the rights to the intellectual property created during the tenure of employment. I capped the pen. The sound was a sharp click that seemed to echo in the microphone. I reached up to my lapel and unclipped my security clearance badge, the all-access ID that granted entry to the server farm and the deepest levels of the synthetics mainframe. It was the highest clearance in the company, higher even than Julian's. I placed it gently on top of the signed papers. The audience was confused. The applause had died down, replaced by a ripple of uncertain murmurs. They were watching a transaction they did not understand. I turned to Julian. He looked relieved, almost giddy. He leaned in, turning off his microphone, likely to whisper some final condescending comfort, perhaps to tell me not to worry about money. I moved closer, standing on my toes so my lips brushed his ear. I smelled his cologne, a scent I had once loved, and felt the heat radiating from his traitorous skin. "You missed something, Julian," I whispered, my voice low and steady, audible only to him. He pulled back slightly, a frown creasing his forehead. "What?" I leaned back in, savoring the words. "You sold the car, Julian, but you forgot that I am the only one with the keys." He looked at me, confusion clouding his eyes. He did not understand. He thought I was speaking in metaphors about our marriage. He had no idea that I was speaking literal. "Technical truth. You just sold an empty shell," I whispered, finality in my tone. I pulled away, turning my back on him. I did not look at Victoria. I did not look at the girl with my sapphire around her neck. I walked across the stage, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the hardwood. I descended the stairs and walked straight down the center aisle. The sea of tuxedos parted for me, faces turning to watch the woman who had just been publicly discarded. I kept my head high, my face a mask of stone. I pushed through the heavy double doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the cool, quiet hallway of the plaza. Behind me, I could hear Julian trying to recover the mood, cracking a joke to the crowd, the laughter sounding muffled and distant. Let them laugh. Let them drink their champagne and count their theoretical money. I walked toward the exit, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. It was the rhythm of a countdown. They thought I was walking away with nothing. They were wrong. I was walking away with the code. And without the code, Synthetics Global was nothing more than a very expensive error message waiting to happen. The valet at the plaza looked at the ticket in my hand, then at my gown, and then back at the ticket with a confusion that bordered on offense. He was accustomed to fetching Bentleys and Maybachs for the guests of the Thorpe family, not a gray, dented sedan with a rattling exhaust pipe that I had bought off Craigslist 3 weeks ago under my maiden name. When he pulled it around, the engine sputtered a cough of black smoke that seemed to stain the pristine air of Fifth Avenue. I tipped him $20, slid into the driver's seat, and kicked off my heels. The leather was cracked, and the car smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and pine air freshener, a stark contrast to the lavender-scented, climate-controlled bubble of the limousine I had arrived in. But as I gripped the worn steering wheel and merged into the chaotic flow of yellow taxis, I felt the first true breath of oxygen enter my lungs in a decade. I drove away from the glittering skyline of Manhattan, crossing the bridge toward the shadowed sprawl of Queens. This was not a retreat. It was a tactical repositioning, I had leased a studio apartment in a nondescript brick building 2 months prior, paying 6 months of rent up front in cash. It had a single mattress on the floor, a folding table, and a secure, encrypted internet connection. It was everything I needed, and nothing I did not. As the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red in my rearview mirror, my mind drifted back, not to the betrayal of tonight, but to the slow, insidious erosion of my soul that had preceded it. It is rarely the final blow that kills you. It is the 1,000 tiny cuts that bleed you dry long before the executioner arrives. I thought about it 10 years ago. I was 24, fresh out of MIT, with a doctorate and a reputation that terrified most of my professors. I lived in code. I saw the world in streams of data, in patterns and probabilities. Human interaction was a chaotic variable I could never quite solve. Then came Julian. He was an economics major at a neighboring college, a man who barely passed his statistics classes but could charm a professor into changing a grade with nothing more than a smile and a firm handshake. He had found me in the library, buried under a mountain of server schematics. He brought me coffee. Black, 2 sugars, exactly how I liked it. Though I had never told him, "You speak the language of the future." Helena. He had told me that night, his blue eyes warm and seemingly sincere. But the world is deaf. You need a translator. You need someone to stand on the soapbox and scream your brilliance so people will actually listen. I fell for it. I fell for the narrative that I was incomplete. He cultivated my insecurity like a gardener tending a poisonous weed. Whenever we went to parties, he would squeeze my hand when I started to talk about algorithms, cutting me off with a laugh. "Helena, darling, you are boring them," he would whisper later in the car. "You are too technical. You make people feel stupid. Let me do the talking. You just look beautiful and nod. It makes you mysterious." And so, I became mysterious. I became silent. I let him rewrite my reality until I believed that my voice was a liability. I surrendered the microphone, then the podium, and finally, the room itself. Victoria Thorpe was the cement that held Julian's wall of lies together. My mother-in-law was a woman who viewed affection as a weakness and control as a virtue. I remembered the Sunday dinners at their Hamptons estate, where she would seat me at the far end of the table, away from the important guests. Men want a wife, not a calculator. "Helena," she would say, sipping her Chardonnay with a disdainful curl of her lip, "you are lucky Julian is so charitable. Most men would find a woman with your intensity exhausting. You should be grateful he protects you from the public eye. The world is cruel to women who think too much. They made me feel small so they could feel tall. They hollowed me out so they could live inside my skin, but in the silence they imposed on me. I worked, while Julian was out playing golf with investors and Victoria was hosting charity galas to launder her reputation. I was in the basement. Building Core X, they thought it was just a trading bot. They had no idea what it truly was. Core X was not just lines of code. It was a quantum-based predictive engine. It did not just analyze the market trends. It anticipated them based on global data ingestion, from weather patterns in Brazil to shipping manifest delays in Shanghai. It had an accuracy rating of 99%. It was the holy grail of finance. As Synthetics Global grew, Julian pushed me further into the shadows. I went from being the co-founder to the chief technology officer, and then, slowly, my name began to disappear from the press releases. I was erased from the company website. I was excluded from board meetings. We need to streamline the brand. Julian had argued 3 years ago. Investors want a single visionary leader, like Jobs, like Musk. Having 2 heads confuses the market. You know you hate the spotlight anyway. "Helena, this is for your own good." I believed him. God help me. I believed him because I wanted to believe that my husband had my best interests at heart. I thought we were a team, playing different positions. I did not realize I was not even on the field. I was just the equipment manager. The illusion shattered 2 years ago. I had been working late on a patch for the security protocol when I stumbled across a discrepancy in the server logs. It was a small data leak, something a junior engineer might miss. But to me, it was a glaring red flare. I traced the digital footprint. It led not to a hacker, but to a private offshore account in the Cayman Islands. An account linked to a shell company registered to Julian Thorpe. He was skimming. He was siphoning millions of dollars from the operational budget, disguising it as consulting fees and RD overhead. My hands had shaken as I dug deeper. I accessed his private communications, easy enough, considering he used his birthday as his password. That was when I found the messages. Not just with the girl I saw tonight, but with others before her, dozens of them, and the texts to his mother, mocking me. She is a golden goose. Mother, he had written, as long as she keeps laying the eggs, I will keep the cage comfortable. But God, she is dull. I cannot wait until the Vanguard deal goes through so I can finally dump her in a sanitarium and enjoy the money. That was 2 years ago. I could have left then. I could have sued him. I could have burned the house down. But rage is a volatile fuel. It burns hot and fast, and then leaves you with nothing but ash. I did not want ash. I wanted annihilation. So, I stayed. I played the part of the submissive, fragile wife. I let him think he was winning. I let him isolate me. I let him believe I was weak, broken, and oblivious. And every night, while he slept the sleep of the arrogant, I went down to the basement and rewrote Core X. I wove myself into the very DNA of the system. I turned the code into a symbiotic organism that required a specific, biological signal to function. My signal. I pulled the car up to the curb of my new apartment building. The streetlights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the pavement. I grabbed my single suitcase from the passenger seat and climbed the 3 flights of stairs. The apartment was cold, but it felt clean. It felt like a blank canvas. I sat down on the floor, leaning my back against the wall, and placed my phone on the folding table in front of me. I checked my watch. It was 11:59 at night. 1 minute left. The system I had built was designed with a failsafe. Every 24 hours. At precisely midnight, the Core X mainframe initiated a handshake protocol. It was a security measure I had sold to the board as a defense against external hacking. The system required the master architect, me, to input a biometric verification code via a secure app on my phone. It was a simple fingerprint scan, a heartbeat rhythm analysis, and a retinal flash. If the verification was received, the encryption keys for the trading algorithms would refresh, and the system would continue to print money for another day, if the verification was not received. My phone buzzed. The sound was loud in the empty room. The screen lit up, illuminating the peeling paint on the opposite wall. System alert. Daily authentication required. Time remaining. 60 seconds. I stared at the screen. I could picture the server room at Synthetics Global right now. The lights would be humming blue. The cooling fans would be whirring. The billions of dollars of capital entrusted to us by Vanguard would be sitting in the digital vaults, waiting for the command to multiply. Julian was probably at the after-party now, clinking glasses, laughing, his hand resting on the hip of his 22-year-old mistress. He was likely boasting about how he had handled the Helena problem, how smoothly the divorce papers had been signed. He thought the hard part was over. He thought the company was a machine that ran on electricity and greed. He forgot that I had built it to run on loyalty. Time remaining. 30 seconds. My finger hovered over the screen. It would be so easy to press it, to keep the world turning, to avoid the chaos that was about to unfold. Habit is a powerful force. For 10 years, my life's purpose had been to keep that system alive, to nurture it, to protect it. But that system was no longer mine. It belonged to a man who had sold me out. I withdrew my hand. I picked up the bottle of cheap Cabernet I had bought at a liquor store on the way here. I poured a glass into a plastic cup. The wine was dark, almost black in the dim light. Time remaining. 10 seconds. I imagined the code inside the servers beginning to panic. It was searching for me. It was reaching out across the digital void, asking, "Mother, are you there?" "I am here," I thought, "but I'm not coming to save you this time." Time remaining. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The screen on my phone turned red. A new message flashed. Stark and final. Authentication failed. Initiating stasis protocol. Lockdown imminent. I reached out and held the power button on the side of my phone. The screen went black. The room plunged back into darkness. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted sharp and acidic, lacking the smooth finish of the vintage bottles Julian kept in our cellar. But to me, it tasted like victory. I did not know exactly what was happening at the headquarters right now, but I knew the physics of what I had set in motion. The keys had just been thrown into the ocean. The engine had just been cut. The billion-dollar vehicle was now coasting on momentum, but in a few hours, when the markets opened in London and Tokyo, the world would realize that there was nobody driving the car. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the wall, for the first time in 10 years. I did not have to worry about the market. I did not have to worry about Julian's approval. I did not have to worry about Victoria's sneers. I waited for the silence to be broken by the inevitable scream of a dying empire. It would not be long now. The morning sun would bring chaos, lawsuits, and panic. But tonight, in this empty room in Queens, there was only peace. The peace of a woman who had finally decided to stop building the castle and start watching it burn. The morning sun that rose over Manhattan was likely brilliant, the kind of sharp, aggressive light that bounces off the glass canyons of Wall Street and makes the city feel invincible. In Queens, I slept past dawn for the first time in years, but at the headquarters of Synthetics Global on the 42nd floor, the nightmare began promptly at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was not there to see it, but I did not need to be. I knew the architecture of that office as intimately as I knew the lines of my own palm. I knew the hum of the servers, the specific shade of blue on the trading floor monitors, and the exact arrogant cadence of the morning briefing. Most importantly, I knew my code. I knew exactly how Core X would behave when it woke up and realized its mother was gone. It started in the main trading pit. This was the nerve center. A room the size of a basketball court lined with wall-to-wall LED screens that usually displayed a waterfall of live market data. Green for gains, red for losses, flashing rapidly as the algorithms executed thousands of microtransactions per second. The traders, men in vests who thought they were masters of the universe, but were really just glorified babysitters for my software, were settling in with their coffees. At 8:01, the waterfall stopped. It did not crash. It did not go black. A crash would have triggered emergency alarms and redundant backups. This was far more sinister. The screen simply turned gray. A flat, neutral, lifeless gray. The rolling tickers froze. The probability graphs flattened into straight, horizontal lines. I can imagine the initial confusion. A few traders tapping their keyboards, thinking it was a local lag. A murmur rippling through the room. Then, the shouting began. "Is the feed down?" someone would have yelled. "Check the connection." But the connection was fine. The fiber optic cables running under the Atlantic were pulsing with light. The hardware was functioning perfectly. The heart was healthy. But the brain had simply decided to stop sending signals to the limbs. Core X had entered stasis mode. In the server room. The panic would have been immediate and visceral. I had replaced my loyal engineering team with Julian's hand-picked innovators months ago. Men who used buzzwords they did not understand and wrote sloppy, inefficient patches on top of my elegant framework. The new head of IT was a man named Marcus. He was 30 years old, wore expensive sneakers to work, and had a resume padded with exaggerated accomplishments from Silicon Valley startups that no longer existed. Marcus would have been sweating. I know this because the system logs, which I could still view via a passive, read-only mirror on my laptop in Queens, showed a frantic series of administrative commands being entered at 8:05. Sudo restart service, access denied. Force reboot root directory, access denied. Override security protocols, access denied. Every command met the same wall of silence. The system was not rejecting them because it was broken. It was rejecting them because they were strangers. It was like a dog that refuses to obey a burglar. By 8:15, the financial bleeding had begun. Synthetics Global did not just analyze the market, it actively participated in it. We managed liquidity pools for institutional investors. We held positions that required constant, millisecond adjustments to hedge against volatility. With the system in stasis, those positions were exposed. The market moved, but synthetics stood still. The estimated loss rate was approximately $3 million every 60 seconds. While the trading floor descended into chaos, Julian Thorpe was 30 floors up in the executive boardroom. Unaware that his empire was hemorrhaging money, he was in the middle of a victory lap. He was hosting a breakfast briefing for the senior partners of Vanguard and several key industry analysts. The room would have smelled of fresh pastries and expensive roast coffee. Julian, ever the performer, was likely standing at the head of the table, projecting charts that showed projected growth curves that were now entirely fictional. I can picture him smiling, that charming, predatory smile. He would be saying things like, synergy and next-generation integration. Then, the door opened. It was not a polite entrance. It was his personal assistant, a young woman who usually looked terrified of her own shadow. She walked right up to him, interrupting him mid-sentence. She whispered in his ear, her face pale. Julian's smile would have faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before he plastered it back on. He turned to the room, to the men who had just promised him $1.2 billion. My apologies. Gentlemen, Julian said, smoothing his tie. It seems we have a minor technical glitch. Just a routine calibration issue following the merger integration. Standard procedure. Please, enjoy the refreshments. I will be back in a moment. He walked out of the room with a calm, measured stride. But the moment the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him, the mask shattered. He broke into a run. He stormed into the IT department, not with the grace of a CEO, but with the desperation of a man who smells smoke. And he was not alone. Victoria Thorpe had arrived. She must have been in her office when the stock ticker on her desk flatlined. Victoria did not run. She marched. She swept into the server room like a hurricane in Chanel. The room was already a scene of bedlam. Engineers were typing furiously on terminals that refused to respond. Phones were ringing off the hook. Angry clients. Confused brokers. The terrifying sound of credibility dying. "Fix this!" Victoria shrieked, her voice cutting through the noise of the cooling fans. "Why are the screens gray? Why are we not trading?" Marcus, the head of IT, looked up. He was pale, his expensive shirt damp with perspiration. He was surrounded by 3 other senior engineers, all of them looking at a monitor that displayed a single, pulsing command prompt. "We can't." "Mrs. Thorpe," Marcus stammered. "We are locked out." "What do you mean locked out?" Julian barked, pushing past a junior developer to loom over Marcus. "I own this building. I own these servers. You have the admin passwords. Use them." "We use them, sir," Marcus cried, his voice cracking. "We use the root access. We use the emergency back doors. Nothing works. The system isn't recognizing our authority. It has sequestered the kernel." "Sequestered?" Victoria spat the word like it was poison. "Stop speaking gibberish and reboot the damn thing. Pull the plug if you have to." "If we pull the plug, we lose the live ledgers," Marcus explained, terror in his eyes. "We could lose billions in transactional data. We have to unlock it softly, but it is asking for a key we don't have." "What key?" Julian demanded. Marcus pointed a trembling finger at the main diagnostic screen. "It demands a biosignature," he said. "It is a dead man's switch. Sir, it seems the system was programmed to perform a liveness check on the chief architect every morning at midnight. If that check fails, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. If the check fails, the system assumes the architect is dead or compromised." Julian finished, his voice dropping to a whisper, "or removed," Marcus added helpfully, which earned him a glare from Victoria that could have melted steel. Julian stared at the screen. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He remembered the stage at the plaza. He remembered my whisper. "The keys are in my heartbeat." He had thought it was poetry. He had thought it was the melodramatic parting shot of a scorned woman. He had not realized it was a technical manual. He grabbed Marcus by the collar. Bypass it. Hack it. I don't care what you do. Break the code. We are trying, Marcus yelped, but the encryption is polymorphic. It changes every time we touch it. It is like fighting a ghost. And sir, look at the main display. Julian turned. The large central screen on the wall. The one that usually displayed the global heat map of synthetics' dominance, rippled. The gray static cleared. In its place, a message appeared. It was white text on a black background. Simple, stark, and legally binding. System alert. Unauthorized user detected. Intellectual property protocol violation. Asset protection mode activated. Access restricted to owner. H. Briarwood. The room went silent. The ringing phone seemed to fade into the background. The text was huge, undeniable. It was not just an error message. It was a flag of conquest planted in the middle of their territory. Victoria gasped, clutching her pearls in a cliché of shock that would have been funny if the stakes weren't so high. That ungrateful little witch. She hissed. She sabotaged us. Call the police. Julian, call the police right now. She didn't sabotage us. Mother, Julian said, his voice hollow. He was staring at the name on the screen. Briarwood. My maiden name. The name I had used when I wrote the original kernel, long before I became a Thorpe. She didn't plant a virus. Julian continued, the horror dawning on him fully. She just took her property back. He looked around the room, at the millions of dollars of hardware, at the terrified faces of the staff he had hired to replace my team. He realized then that none of it mattered. The servers, the fiber optics, the branding, the office, it was all just a fancy gun, and I had walked out with the bullets. Sir? Marcus interrupted, looking at his tablet. The Vanguard partners they are messaging, they want to know why the live feed in the conference room just showed an intellectual property dispute warning. Julian closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, but there was no air in the room, only the suffocating weight of his own hubris. Tell them, it is a mistake, Julian said, but the confidence was gone. He sounded like a child caught in a lie. It is not a mistake, Victoria screamed, losing her composure entirely. She pounded her fist on the console. She locked the doors. Break them down. I don't care about the biosignature. Get a hacker. Get the Russians. Get anyone. We can't brute force this. Mrs. Thorpe, Marcus said. Defeated. It is quantum encrypted. It would take a supercomputer 100 years to guess the key. The only way to open this door is with the person who closed it. Julian opened his eyes. He looked at his watch. It was 8:45. 45 minutes of downtime. Roughly $135 million in missed opportunities and penalties. And the market had not even hit its peak volume yet. Get me my phone, Julian said quietly. But you said we should call the lawyers, Victoria argued. Lawyers can't write code. Mother, Julian snapped, his veneer of respectability finally cracking under the pressure. He grabbed his smartphone from his pocket. His hands were shaking. He stared at the screen. He knew what he had to do. He had to make the call he had sworn he would never make. He had to call the woman he had discarded less than 12 hours ago and beg for the keys to the car he had already sold. As he dialed the number, the message on the big screen seemed to pulse, taunting him. Access restricted. He held the phone to his ear, listening to the ringback tone. In the silence of the server room, everyone watched him, the master of the universe, the CEO of the year, reduced to a desperate man waiting for his wife to pick up the phone. But in Queens, the phone did not ring. I had already removed the SIM card. Julian lowered the phone slowly. She's not answering. Of course she isn't. Victoria spat. She wants money. That is all this is. Extortion. No, Julian whispered, staring at the gray screens that reflected his own pale face. It's not money. He looked at the empty trading floor through the glass separation. He saw the future of Synthetics Global. It wasn't an empire, it was a museum. She doesn't want money, Julian said, a cold realization settling in his gut. She wants us to watch it die. The Queens Public Library on 89th Avenue was a sanctuary of dust motes and silence. A stark cathedral dedicated to the written word that stood in direct opposition to the screaming digital chaos I had unleashed upon Manhattan. The air smelled of vanilla from the degrading lignin in old paper, and the lemon floor wax used by the janitor who was currently mopping the aisle 3 rows down. I sat at a scratched wooden table in the back corner, a stack of heavy hardcovers built like a fortress wall around me. The title of the book open in front of me was Intellectual Property and Executive Severance, a case study in corporate law. It was dry reading, dense with legalese and precedents, but to me, it read like a thriller. I was not just reading for pleasure, I was rehearsing. I knew exactly what was coming, and I needed my lines to be perfect. I reached into my pocket and retrieved the small sliver of plastic I had removed the night before, my SIM card. I balanced it on the tip of my finger for a moment. It was such a small thing, a tiny gold-plated chip, yet it was the only bridge remaining between my quiet new life and the burning wreckage of Synthetics Global. I knew that by reinserting it, I was inviting the devil back into my parlor, but silence was only a weapon if the enemy knew you were listening to their screams. If I remained a ghost, they could spin a narrative that I had disappeared or died. No, I needed to be present. I needed to be heard. I needed to be the one to tell them no. I slid the card into the slot of my phone and watched the screen flicker to life for a massive 3 seconds. The phone was peaceful. Then, the network connection established itself, and the device nearly vibrated off the table. It was a physical assault. The notifications cascaded down the screen in a blur of white boxes. 342 missed calls, 112 voicemails, 500 text messages. The names flashed by like a desperate roll call. Julian Thorpe, Victoria Thorpe, Sterling, the lawyer, Marcus, the IT imposter. Even Elias Vane from Vanguard had tried to call me twice. I did not have time to scroll through the panic. The phone rang again instantly in my hand. The caller ID displayed a picture I had taken 3 years ago. Julian, smiling on a sailboat in the Mediterranean, looking like a man who owned the wind. Now, that smile looked like a baring of teeth. I took a breath, centered myself, and swiped the green icon. I did not put the phone to my ear. I placed it face up on the wooden table, right next to my open book, and pressed the speaker button. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, heavy and thick, forcing him to make the first move. Helena? Julian's voice cracked through the tiny speaker. It was breathless, tight, the voice of a man who had been running uphill. Helena, baby, are you there? Thank God. I have been calling you for 2 hours. Where have you been? The tone was jarring. It was the voice he used when he wanted something. The salesman voice that dripped with a synthetic sweetness so thick it could clog an artery. It was the voice he used to charm investors, to soothe angry board members, and, for a decade, to manipulate me. He was trying to reset the board. He was pretending that last night, the public firing, the divorce papers, the humiliation, was just a minor lover's quarrel. I reached out and turned the page of my book. The sound was crisp and loud in the quiet library. Scritch turn. Helena? Julian said, his voice faltering slightly. Did you hear me? Look, honey, we need to talk. Things got heated last night. We were all under a lot of pressure. The merger, the press, mother's expectations, you know how it is. We made some decisions in the heat of the moment that were, frankly, premature. Scritch turn. I flipped another page, smoothing the paper down with a deliberate, slow hand. I think we should meet, Julian continued, the desperation starting to bleed through the syrup. I can send a car for you, anywhere you are. We can sit down, have a coffee, and work this out like adults. You know I love you, right? I have always admired your talent. You are the heart of this company. We are a team. We have always been a team. I leaned over the phone. My voice was calm, low, and stripped of any emotion. It was the voice of a stranger. I am reading a very interesting chapter on constructive dismissal. Julian, I said, did you know that in the state of New York, Firing an employee publicly while confiscating their access badge constitutes a complete severance of liability? It is fascinating. The syrup on the other end of the line evaporated instantly. "Stop it," Julian snapped. The facade dropped, revealing the bully underneath. "Stop playing games. Helena, the system is down. The trading floor is dead. We are losing millions every minute. Turn it back on. Now." I turned another page. The sound was like a slap. "I cannot do that." "Julian," I said, my eyes scanning a paragraph about non-compete clauses. "What do you mean you can't? You built the damn thing." "You are the only one who can," Julian shouted. I could hear the background noise of the office now. Shouting voices, ringing phones, the chaotic soundtrack of a sinking ship. "I mean, I legally cannot," I replied, my voice maddeningly reasonable. "You fired me." "Julian," I signed the papers. "Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the termination agreement that your lawyer, Mr. Sterling, so kindly drafted. It states that the terminated employee must immediately cease all access to company property, data, and systems. It explicitly forbids me from logging in." "I am authorizing you," Julian screamed. "I am the CEO, and I am telling you to log in." "It does not work that way," I said. "You revoked my security clearance. The system knows that. If I try to log in now, I would be committing a federal crime. I would be hacking. And you threatened me with jail time last night, remember? I am just trying to be a law-abiding citizen." There was a scuffling sound on the other end, a muffled curse, and then a new voice screeched through the speaker. It was high-pitched, trembling with rage, and loud enough that the librarian 2 tables over looked up and shushed me. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little parasite," Victoria Thorpe was screaming. "After everything we did for you, we took you in. We gave you a life. We clothed you. We fed you. We tolerated your social ineptitude. And this is how you repay us? By biting the hand that fed you?" I smiled. It was a cold, small smile. "Hello, Victoria," I said. "I see you are still charming as ever, but you seem to be confused. You did not feed me. I fed you. That $1.2 billion valuation? That was my food. You were just the ones holding the fork." "Don't you dare speak to me like that," Victoria shrieked. "You are destroying my son's legacy. You are a saboteur. We will sue you until you are living in a cardboard box. We will take everything." "You already took everything," I pointed out gently. "You took the house. You took the car. You took the company. You even took the dog. And you hate dogs. What is left to sue for? My student loans? Give me the phone." Julian's voice returned, wrestling the device away from his mother. "Helena, listen to me. This is not a joke. Vanguard is threatening to walk. If they walk, the stock collapses. If the stock collapses, we are all ruined. Do you understand? Your shares will be worthless too." I laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. "I do not have any shares. Julian, remember? I signed them over last night, in exchange for that generous severance package that barely covers my rent for the next 6 months. So, frankly, the stock price is no longer my concern. It is entirely yours." There was a silence on the line, a long, heavy silence where I could hear Julian breathing. He was running the numbers. He was realizing that he had no leverage. He had stripped me of everything to hurt me, and in doing so, he had stripped himself of the ability to threaten me. A person with nothing to lose is the most dangerous enemy in the world. "Okay," Julian said. His voice was different now. It was low, shaking. It was the voice of a man negotiating for his life. "Okay. Helena, name your price." I raised an eyebrow, though he could not see it. "Excuse me?" "Money," Julian said hurriedly. "That is what you want, right? That is what this is all about. You want a cut? Fine. I respect that. Business is business. Come back to the office. Unlock the system. Get the trading floor running again. If you do that, I will write you a check. $5 million. Cash. Today." I paused. I let the number hang in the air. $5 million. To the old Helena. The one who shopped at discount stores and worried about the electric bill. It would have been a fortune. But in the context of what he had stolen, it was an insult. It was a tip left for the waitress after he had eaten the entire meal. 5 million, I repeated slowly. 10, Julian shouted immediately. Sensing my hesitation, 10 million, and I will let you keep the apartment in the city. Just come in and put your hand on the scanner. That is all you have to do. $10 million for 5 seconds of work. Please, Helena. I looked around the library. I looked at the worn spine of the book in front of me. I looked at my own hands, unadorned, stripped of the diamond ring that had felt like a shackle for so long. You still do not get it, do you? I asked softly. Get what? Julian sounded near tears. You think this is a transaction, I said. You think everything is a transaction. You think you can buy compliance. You think you can buy loyalty. And now you think you can buy forgiveness. I am offering you $10 million, Julian screamed. Are you insane? No, Julian. I am just finally awake. I closed the book with a heavy thud. My value is not a line item on a spreadsheet that you can negotiate, I said, my voice hardening into steel. And my dignity is not for sale. Certainly not for pennies on the dollar of what you stole from me. You wanted to run the company. Julian? You wanted to be the big man? Then run it. Figure it out. Write the code yourself, or ask your mother to do it. But do not call me again. Helena, wait. No, you cannot. I pressed the red button. The call ended. The screaming stopped. The silence rushed back in, filling the space around me. I sat there for a moment, listening to the beating of my own heart. It was steady. It was calm. I powered down the phone completely. I removed the back cover and slid the battery out, just to be sure. Then I removed the SIM card again. I looked at the little chip one last time. Then I stood up and walked over to the wastebasket near the reference desk. I dropped the SIM card into the bin, watching it land on top of a discarded candy wrapper. I walked back to my table, picked up my book, and continued reading. Chapter 4. The Inevitable Consequences of Breach of Contract. It was getting to the good part. They say that in war, truth is the first casualty, but in a high-stakes corporate divorce, truth is not just killed, it is dismembered, rearranged, and paraded around on the evening news as a cautionary tale. I had expected Julian to fight dirty. I had expected legal threats and financial bullying, but I had underestimated the sheer industrial-scale efficiency of the Thorpe family PR machine when it went into survival mode. By the time the sun set on the first day of the blackout, the narrative had already been poured into the concrete molds of public opinion. I was no longer Helena Briarwood, the architect of a billion-dollar algorithm. I was Helena Thorpe, the unstable, jealous, and mentally fragile ex-wife who had snapped. I sat in a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from my apartment, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, watching the television mounted in the corner. It was tuned to a major cable news network. The banner at the bottom of the screen screamed in urgent red letters, "Cyber sabotage on Wall Street. Billions at risk." And there was my face. It was a photo taken 3 years ago at a charity gala. In the original image, I had been laughing at a joke Julian whispered in my ear, my head thrown back, my hair slightly windblown, but the image on the screen had been cropped and filtered. The lighting was darkened to accentuate the shadows under my eyes. My open-mouthed laughter, stripped of context, looked like a scream. They had frozen the frame to make me look unhinged, manic, a woman on the edge of a breakdown. Next to my face was Julian's. He looked somber, professional, the weary captain trying to steer his ship through a storm caused by a hysterical passenger. Sources close to the family tell us that Mrs. Thorpe has struggled with severe mental health issues for years, the anchorwoman said, her voice dripping with practiced concern. It is believed that in a fit of jealousy over the pending divorce, she initiated a digital lockdown of the synthetic servers. This is not just a domestic dispute. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an act of domestic terrorism against the financial infrastructure of New York. Domestic terrorism. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and ridiculous. I looked around the diner, A few truck drivers and a tired nurse were eating their meals. No one looked at me. To them, I was just a woman in a hoodie reading a book. They did not recognize the cyber terrorist on the screen because the media had created a monster that bore no resemblance to the quiet woman sitting in booth 4. Julian and Victoria had hired the Blackwood Group. I recognized their fingerprints immediately. They were a crisis management firm known for their scorched earth policy. Their strategy was simple: destroy the accuser's credibility so thoroughly that even if they told the truth, no one would listen. They were flooding the internet with bots. I checked the social media feeds on my burner phone. Thousands of comments were pouring in every minute. She looks crazy. Look at her eyes. Why can't she just let him be happy? Women like this are why men are afraid to get married. Lock her up. She is costing people their pensions. It was a tsunami of hatred. It was designed to break me. It was designed to make me feel so isolated, so hated, that I would crawl back to Julian and beg for forgiveness just to make the noise stop. But the Blackwood Group made one miscalculation. They assumed I cared what people thought of me. They forgot that I had spent 10 years being ignored. I was comfortable in the silence. I was comfortable being the outsider. And more importantly, I knew something they did not. I knew that the louder they screamed, the more terrified they were. The hammer dropped at 6 o'clock the next morning. I was awake, doing yoga on the bare floor of my apartment, when the hallway erupted with the sound of heavy boots. There was no polite knock. There was a thunderous pounding that shook the doorframe. "Police! Open up!" I did not panic. I had anticipated this. I stood up, smoothed my leggings, and walked to the door. I unlocked it and stepped back just as it swung open. 6 officers from the NYPD Cybercrimes Unit poured into my tiny studio. They were wearing raid jackets and carrying tactical gear, as if they expected to find a server farm and a team of armed guards. Instead, they found a yoga mat, a folding table, and a woman holding a bottle of water. "Helena Thorpe?" the lead detective barked. He was a large man with a tired face and eyes that had seen too much screen time. "Helena Briarwood," I corrected calmly. "We have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of unauthorized computer access, extortion, and grand larceny, and we have a warrant to search these premises for any electronic devices containing proprietary data belonging to Synthetics Global." I nodded. I did not resist. I let them cuff my hands behind my back. The metal was cold, but my skin was colder. They tore the apartment apart. It did not take long. There was almost nothing to tear. They emptied my suitcase. They checked under the mattress. But their prize was the laptop sitting on the folding table. The detective seized it like it was a smoking gun. He opened it. Seeing the screensaver, a simple geometric pattern, "Bag it," he ordered. "We will get the forensics guys to crack it downtown. We will find the code she stole." I almost laughed. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself. They thought the code was a file. They thought it was a document, a folder, something physical that I had copied onto a hard drive and carried away like a thief in the night. They were thinking in terms of the 20th century. They were looking for a floppy disk in a cloud-based world. The laptop was clean. It was a $300 machine I had bought for browsing the news. They could scrub that hard drive down to the atoms, and they would find nothing but a few PDF books on law and a recipe for sourdough bread. The code, the Genesis code, was not on that machine. It was not on any machine. Years ago, when I first realized Julian's ambition was outpacing his ethics, I had made a decision. I did not store the master key on a company server. I did not store it on a USB drive. I uploaded the encrypted kernel of Core X to a decentralized blockchain. It was sharded, broken into millions of tiny, unrecognizable fragments, and distributed across thousands of nodes in a global network. The key to reassemble it was not a password. It was a smart contract that triggered only when specific conditions were met, and the primary condition was my biometric signature broadcast from a verified device. The police were seizing an empty shell. The soul of the machine was floating in the digital ether, untouchable, unhackable, and completely invisible to a standard forensic search. They hauled me down to the precinct. The walk from the police car to the station entrance was a gauntlet. The press had been tipped off. Another Blackwood Group tactic. Cameras flashed in my face, blinding and aggressive. Reporters shouted questions that were really accusations. Why are you holding the economy hostage? Did you do it to hurt his new girlfriend? Are you demanding a ransom? I kept my head up. I looked straight ahead. I did not hide my face. I wanted Julian to see me. I wanted him to see that I was not crying. They held me for 12 hours. They interrogated me in a small, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and intimidation. They demanded the password. They demanded I reverse the hack. I repeated the same phrase. Over and over, with the monotony of a broken record. I have not hacked anything. I was terminated from my position. I have no access. The system is functioning exactly as designed. It is in asset protection mode. If you want it unlocked, you need to speak to the owner. Who is the owner? The detective slammed his hand on the table. According to the Intellectual Property Registry, I said, but I'm currently under arrest and have been fired, so I am unable to perform any work duties. They had nothing. No evidence of a hack, no evidence of malware, just a system that had turned itself off because the authorized user was gone. It was a civil dispute masquerading as a crime, and eventually, their lawyers realized that holding me was a liability. They released me at 8 o'clock in the evening. No bail. Just a summons to appear. I walked out of the station. The night air cool against my face. My laptop was still in evidence. But I didn't need it. I had the world in my head. I went back to the apartment. It was tossed. My clothes scattered on the floor. I sat down amidst the mess and checked the burner phone I had hidden inside the vent. The one place they hadn't looked. The narrative was shifting. While the mainstream media was still painting me as the villain, the underground currents were turning. On Reddit, on Blind, on the specialized tech forums where the real engineers lived, questions were being asked. Wait, if she was just a figurehead, why did the system crash the second she left? This isn't a hack. This looks like a dead man's switch. That means she wrote the core. Julian Thorpe is a sales guy. He can't code his way out of a paper bag. Team Helena. The hashtag was small, but it was there. The doubt was starting to creep in. And then there was the message from Vanguard. It wasn't sent to me, but leaked on a financial news blog. A memo from the senior partners at Vanguard to the board of Synthetics Global. Regarding the inability to restore service, we are reconsidering the viability of the acquisition potential fraud failure to disclose critical dependencies on key personnel. Julian was bleeding out. The investors were smelling the rot. He had played the victim card. He had played the bully card. And he had played the law enforcement card. None of it had worked. The system remained gray. The money remained frozen. The next morning, a courier arrived. He was not a police officer. He was a private process server, dressed in a cheap suit. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a court summons for an emergency injunction hearing, but clipped to the front of it was a handwritten note on heavy, cream-colored cardstock. It was Julian's handwriting. The loops were jagged, the pressure uneven. He had written it in anger or fear. Helena, enough. You have made your point. You have embarrassed us. You have cost us millions. Are you happy? Come to the office at noon tomorrow. We will settle this. We will give you what you want, but bring the key, if you don't. I will make sure you never work in this industry again. I will bury you. Julian. It was a summons to the lion's den. He wanted me on his turf, surrounded by his lawyers, his security, and his mother. He wanted to intimidate me into submission. He thought that because he had the office, the suits, and the building, he still held the power. I looked at the note. I looked at the threat. I will bury you. He didn't realize that I was already a seed. He had buried me in that basement 10 years ago, and I had grown into something he could not cut down. I would go. I would go to the office, not to surrender, and not to negotiate. I would go because it was time for the final lesson. He wanted a meeting? I would give him a performance. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. It was the number of a tech journalist, a woman named Sarah who ran a blog called The Silicon Guillotine. She had been the only one to ever ask me a technical question at a party 5 years ago. Before Julian had pulled me away, "Hello?" she answered, sounding surprised. Sarah, this is Helena Briarwood. I said. There was a pause. The sound of typing stopped. Helena? The Helena? I have a story for you. I said, and I'm going to give you an exclusive, but you need to meet me at Synthetics Global Headquarters tomorrow at noon and bring a cameraman who knows how to live stream. Why? She asked, her voice trembling with excitement. What is going to happen? I am going to fix the computer. I said, and I want the world to see exactly what is inside it. Walking into the headquarters of Synthetics Global used to feel like entering a cathedral of my own making. The glass walls, the polished marble floors, the hum of the servers vibrating through the soles of my shoes. It was all a testament to the sleepless nights and the relentless pursuit of perfection. But today, walking through those revolving doors felt like stepping into a sterile, high-tech prison cell. The lobby was eerily quiet. The usual frenetic energy of analysts rushing to get coffee or traders shouting into their phones was gone. The silence was heavy, thick with tension and the smell of impending doom. The receptionists, who usually greeted me with warm smiles, lowered their eyes, terrified to be seen acknowledging the woman whose face was currently plastered on every news network as a domestic terrorist. 2 security guards, men I had hired myself 3 years ago, stepped forward. They did not look me in the eye. They escorted me to the elevator bank, flanking me like I was a volatile chemical that might explode if jostled. We rode up to the executive suite in silence. The numbers on the display climbed steadily, counting down the seconds until I faced the firing squad, when the elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor. The hostility hit me like a physical wave. The glass walls of the conference room were frosted, opaque, hiding the occupants, but I could feel their presence. I straightened my blazer, a cheap one I had bought at a thrift store that morning because my designer wardrobe was still locked in the penthouse, and pushed open the heavy oak doors. They were all there, the cast of my dismantling. Julian sat at the head of the table. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes rimmed with red, and his perfectly coiffed hair was starting to fray at the edges. Next to him sat Victoria, looking like a vulture in a Chanel suit, her eyes narrowing into slits as I entered. Sterling, the spineless lawyer, was shuffling papers nervously, but they were not alone. Across from them sat 3 men in dark, ill-fitting suits that screamed federal government. One of them had a badge clipped to his belt, FBI. Next to him was a woman with sharp glasses and a skeptical expression. The Securities and Exchange Commission. Please, sit down. Mrs. Briarwood, the FBI agent said. His voice was flat, devoid of courtesy. I remained standing. I prefer to stand. Julian slammed his hand on the table. He was trying to project strength, but it came off as petulance. Cut the act. Helena, you see who is here? This is Special Agent Miller from the Cybercrimes Division and Ms. Vance from the SEC. We are done playing games. You are going to unlock my system, or you are going to leave this room in handcuffs. I looked at Agent Miller. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the mahogany table. Mrs. Briarwood, let me be very clear about the situation. Miller said, you are accused of deploying a ransomware attack against a federally regulated financial institution. You have seized control of critical infrastructure. This is not a civil dispute anymore. This is a felony. Under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, you are looking at up to 20 years in federal prison. 20 years, Victoria hissed, leaning in. You will rot. Helena, you will lose everything. Just give us the password and maybe, just maybe, we will ask the district attorney to be lenient. I looked at them. They expected me to crumble. They expected the quiet, socially awkward engineer to terrify at the mention of prison, but they did not understand that to an engineer. The law is just another code, and every code has a logic. If you understand the logic, you can find the exception. I am not holding anything for ransom, I said, my voice steady. I have not asked for money. I have not asked for reinstatement. I have simply pointed out that the system is working as intended. It is encrypted, Julian shouted. You locked us out. That is malware. I turned to the large screen at the end of the room. It was currently black. May I asked. gesturing to the wireless keyboard sitting in the center of the table. Agent Miller nodded slowly. Go ahead. But if you try to delete anything, we will know. I walked to the table and picked up the keyboard. I did not log in. I simply pressed a sequence of keys that brought up the system diagnostic overlay. It was a read-only interface, accessible even when the core was locked. Designed for external auditing. The screen flickered to life. Lines of white text scrolled rapidly against a blue background. It looked like gibberish to the lawyers. But to the agents, it was evidence. Look at the log headers, I said, pointing to the screen. Agent Miller squinted. He was a tech guy, or at least tech literate enough to lead the division. He read the lines out loud. Error 403. Integrity check failed. Ethical compliance protocol activated. Input data mismatch detected. That does not look like ransomware, Miller muttered, frowning. Ransomware usually leaves a text file demanding payment. This looks like an internal error. Exactly, I said. I turned to face the room. Core X is not just a trading bot. It is a neural network designed to learn. But when I built it, I installed a governor, a conscience, if you will. The system is programmed to cross-reference the internal financial data provided by the user against the external reality of the blockchain and public ledgers. I walked closer to Julian. He was starting to sweat. I could see a bead of perspiration trickling down his temple. If the system detects that the data being fed into it is fraudulent, if the numbers do not add up, if the assets are inflated, or if there are discrepancies suggesting manipulation, it assumes it is being used for illegal activity, I explained, to protect the intellectual property and the creator from liability. It locks itself down. I turned back to the FBI agent. Agent Miller, the system did not lock because I left. The system locked because without my biometric override, which I used to manually bypass these warnings for the last 2 years because I trusted my husband, the algorithm did a deep scan of the company books. The room went deadly silent. The air pressure seemed to drop. What are you saying? Ms. Vance from the SEC asked, her voice sharp. She smelled blood. I am saying, I replied, locking eyes with Julian, that my code is not holding the company hostage. My code is acting as a whistleblower. It detected fake data. Julian stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This is a lie. She rigged it. She rigged it to make it look like we are cooking the books. It is a logic bomb. Agent Miller looked at Julian, then back at the screen. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The predator became the prey. Mr. Thorpe, Miller said slowly, why would a trading algorithm flag your internal data as fraudulent? Because she programmed it to, Julian yelled, his face flushing a deep crimson. She is trying to frame me. She is crazy. You saw the news reports. I stepped in, calm and cold. If I rigged it, then the logs will show a manual injection of malicious code. I gestured to the screen again, but if you look at the timestamp, the lock occurred at exactly midnight. The system ran a checksum on the quarterly revenue reports you uploaded to the server yesterday afternoon. Julian, the reports you prepared for the Vanguard merger. I looked at Ms. Vance. I think if the SEC were to compare the numbers inside that server with the numbers Synthetics Global reported to the public, you might find some interesting discrepancies. The system certainly did. That is why it went into stasis mode. It is refusing to process a lie. Victoria stood up now, trembling. You little snake. You are trying to destroy my son to save your own skin. I am trying to keep myself out of prison for aiding and abetting securities fraud. Victoria, I replied. Agent Miller stood up. He walked over to the screen, examining the lines of code. He looked at me, then at Julian. The threat of 20 years in prison was still in the room, but now it was hovering over a different chair. Can you unlock it? Miller asked me. Yes, I said. Then do it, Miller ordered. Unlock it so we can see the data. If the data is clean, you go to jail for sabotage. If the data is dirty, he didn't finish the sentence. He looked at Julian. Julian looked like a trapped animal. He was cornered. If he refused to let me unlock it, he looked guilty. if he let me unlock it. The data, the inflated assets, the hidden debts, the washed money, would be visible to the FBI. But he was arrogant. He relied on his belief that he was smarter than everyone else, especially me. He believed that even if the data was bad, he could explain it away. He could blame it on a glitch, or on me. He just needed the trading to start again so he could move the money and hide the evidence. "Fine," Julian barked. "Unlock it. Prove to everyone that you are a liar, but I want it done now. Every minute is costing me a fortune." I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled since entering the building. "I will unlock it," I said, "but I have one condition. You are in no position to make demands." Sterling the lawyer squeaked. "I am the only person in the world who can open that digital vault," I countered. "So I think I am in exactly the right position." "What do you want?" Miller asked. "Immunity?" "No," I said. "I want transparency." I pointed to the large teleconferencing camera mounted above the screen. "Julian has spent the last 48 hours using the media to paint me as a villain, a hacker, and a lunatic. He has destroyed my reputation to cover his own incompetence. I will not unlock this system in the dark." I looked directly at Julian. "I want a live stream," I stated. "We are going to broadcast the unlocking process. I want the world to see that I am not typing in a virus. I want them to see that I am merely providing the biometric key, and I want them to see exactly what the system displays the moment it wakes up. You want to broadcast internal proprietary data?" Julian laughed nervously. "That is insane. We have client privacy to protect. We can mask the client names." I said, "But the system diagnostics? The audit trail? That needs to be public. If you have nothing to hide—" "Julian, then you should welcome the chance to prove my code is faulty in front of millions of people." I turned to Ms. Vance. "Unless, of course, Synthetics Global has something they do not want the public to see." Ms. Vance looked at Julian. Her suspicion was now a tangible thing. "Mr. Thorpe, if you are the victim of a cyber attack as you claim, transparency should be your best defense. If this woman is bluffing, let her bluff on camera. It will only strengthen your case against her." Julian looked at the faces in the room. He was trapped in a web of his own making. He had called the FBI to arrest me, and now the FBI was waiting for him to prove he was innocent. He had no idea how Core X worked. He probably thought that once I unlocked it, he could just pull the plug on the screen or kick everyone out before they looked too closely at the numbers. He thought he could manage the spin. "Do it," Julian hissed. "Set up the stream. Let the whole world watch you dig your own grave." I nodded. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to Sarah. "The journalist waiting in the lobby. It is a go. Bring the camera up." I turned back to the keyboard. "Get ready." "Julian," I whispered, "the truth is a very bright light. I hope you are wearing sunscreen." The chair at the head of the conference table was warm from where Julian had been sitting, but I did not take his seat. I pulled a sleek, ergonomic mesh chair from the operator's station and rolled it to the center of the room, directly in front of the main terminal. The camera setup was crude. A tripod hastily erected by Sarah's cameraman in the corner, its red light blinking a silent warning to everyone in the room. The live stream was active. I could feel the invisible weight of thousands of eyes, investigators, former employees, tech enthusiasts, and perhaps even the curious public, staring through that lens. I sat down. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit on the roof. Julian stood to my right, his arms crossed, his foot tapping a frantic rhythm against the carpet. Victoria hovered behind him, her face a mask of porcelain tension. Agent Miller and Ms. Vance from the SEC stood on the other side, their notebooks open, their pens poised like weapons. I did not crack my knuckles. I did not stretch my neck. I simply placed my hands on the desk, palms flat, grounding myself. The keyboard in front of me was a mechanical masterpiece I had customized myself years ago, but I did not touch the keys yet. To the right of the keyboard was a biometric scanner, a small glass square that looked innocuous, but held the power to destroy or save this company. "Are we doing this or not?" Julian snapped. his patience fraying like a cheap rope. "Open the vault. Helena, show them there is nothing there so we can arrest you and get back to business." I looked up at the camera, acknowledging the audience. Then I looked at the black screen. "The system is not a vault, Julian," I said softly, my voice carrying clearly in the acoustics of the room. "It is a nervous system, and right now, it is in a coma because you tried to lobotomize it." I reached out and placed my right hand on the scanner. The glass glowed with a soft, azure light. A laser grid swept across my palm, reading the unique topography of my skin, the ridge counts of my fingerprints, and the subdermal map of my veins. I held my breath. This was the moment of truth. If the system had been corrupted by Marcus and his team's clumsy attempts to brute force it, this might not work. Identity confirmed. The synthetic voice of the computer filled the room. It was not a robotic monotone. It was a voice I had synthesized from recordings of my own grandmother, soft and authoritative. "Welcome back, architect." Julian flinched at the sound. He had heard that voice 1,000 times in the early days, back when we were building this dream together. Now, it must have sounded like a ghost. I moved my hand to the keyboard. I did not type a password. Passwords are for users. I was the creator. I typed a logic string, a sequence of commands that told the kernel to stand down from its defensive posture and initiate a full system report. Run sequence, omega-, truth, execute. I hit the enter key. The sound was a sharp, decisive clack that echoed like a gunshot. The giant wall of screens at the front of the room flickered. The gray static that had plagued the company for 48 hours vanished. For a second, the room was plunged into darkness, and I heard Victoria gasp. Then, the light returned. But it was not the blue and green light of the trading floor. It was not the familiar ticker of stock prices and currency exchange rates. The screens were awash in a stark, clinical white light. Rows of black text cascaded down the monitors faster than the eye could follow, organizing themselves into a complex, multi-layered dashboard. This was not the user interface. This was the shadow ledger. This was the view that only the machine saw. "What is this?" Julian asked, his voice trembling. "Where are the trading charts? Turn on the trading charts." I ignored him. I pointed to the center screen. "Core X is awake," I announced, my voice steady. "But as I told you, it is in ethical compliance mode. When the system detects a discrepancy between the data entered by the CEO and the actual flow of capital, it creates a parallel audit log to prevent the corruption of the core algorithm." I stood up and walked toward the screen, acting as a narrator for the FBI agents and the live stream audience. "Agent Miller, if you look at column A, you will see the reported assets of Synthetics Global as filed in the quarterly report to the SEC. It shows a cash reserve of $400 million and a diversified portfolio of blue-chip stocks." I tapped the screen, highlighting the figures. "Now, look at column B. This is the real-time verification from the blockchain. This is the money that actually exists." The room collectively leaned in. The number in column B was not $400 million. It was $12 million. A silence so profound fell over the room that it felt like the air had been sucked out. Julian made a choking sound. "That is a glitch," he screamed, lunging forward. "The system is broken. It is not reading the offshore accounts." I turned to him, my expression pitying. "The system sees everything. Julian, it sees the offshore accounts too." I typed another command. "Expand directory. Cayman shells." A new window popped up. It displayed a spiderweb of transactions. Lines of red light connected Synthetics Global's main operating account to a series of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Cyprus. The names of the shell companies were almost comical in their laziness. JT Holdings, Victory Ventures, New Horizon Trust. Each line represented a transfer of funds. $5 million here, $10 million there. The dates corresponded perfectly with the times Julian had told me the company was going through a lean patch or reinvesting in infrastructure. He had not been reinvesting. He had been looting. This is the last 5 years of financial history. I explained to the paralyzed room. The algorithm noticed that every time capital flowed into the company from investors, a specific percentage, exactly 15%, was immediately routed to these private accounts before being disguised as consulting fees or server maintenance costs. I turned to Miss Vance from the SEC. She was adjusting her glasses, her face pale. She was looking at a smoking gun the size of a billboard. Ms. Vance, I continued, my voice hard. You are looking at a classic Ponzi structure. Julian has been using new investor money to pay dividends to old investors, creating the illusion of profit, while siphoning the principal into his personal accounts. He was inflating the value of the company to $1.2 billion so he could sell it to Vanguard, cash out, and disappear before the house of cards collapsed. Liar! Julian shrieked. He was no longer the suave CEO. He was a cornered rat. He looked at the camera, then at the agents. She fabricated this. She wrote the code to generate fake logs. It is a deep fake. I shook my head. I cannot fake the blockchain. Julian, that is the beauty of it. These transactions are immutable. They are stamped with time, date, and digital origin. And look here. I pointed to the bottom of the screen. User ID, J, Thorpe admin, authorization, biometric match. Every single transfer was authorized by your fingerprint. Julian. Julian looked at the screen. He saw his own digital signature staring back at him, the undeniable proof of his greed. He had thought he was so clever, hiding the money in the digital maze, not realizing that I had built the maze, and I knew where every secret passage led. Agent Miller stepped forward, his hand drifting toward his belt. Mr. Thorpe, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I think you need to step away from the table. No! Julian roared. He lost all control. The facade of the billionaire genius shattered, revealing the frightened thug beneath. He lunged not at me, but at the keyboard. He thought if he could just smash it, if he could just kill the machine, the evidence would vanish. Shut it down, he screamed, his hands clawing for the power cord. I command you to shut it down. He didn't make it. I did not flinch. I did not move. I watched as Agent Miller and the other federal officer tackled him. It was a blur of motion. Julian hit the carpet with a heavy thud. He thrashed, cursing, spitting venom, but the agents were professionals. In seconds, his hands were wrenched behind his back, and the metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. Get off me! Do you know who I am? I am Julian Thorpe. I own this city. Julian yelled, his face pressed against the floor I had kept spotless for years. Victoria Thorpe stood frozen. She looked at her son, pinned to the ground like a common criminal. She looked at the screen, where the evidence of their family's ruin was scrolling in high definition. She looked at me, standing calm and untouched in the center of the storm. Her eyes rolled back in her head. It was a graceful, almost cinematic faint. She crumbled into a heap of expensive fabric, sliding down the wall. I did not rush to help her. I knew Victoria. I knew that even in her unconsciousness, there was a calculation. Fainting was her way of exiting a scene she could no longer control. I turned my attention to the man who had remained silent throughout the entire ordeal, the representative from Vanguard. He was standing in the back, holding a phone to his ear. He had been on an open line with his superiors the entire time. He walked forward. He did not look at Julian. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was respect in his eyes. Not the patronizing respect men give to helpful wives, but the terrified respect one gives to a bomb disposal expert. Mrs. Briarwood, he said. It is Ms. Briarwood. I corrected. Ms. Briarwood. He nodded. I am authorized by the board of Vanguard to make a statement. He looked at the camera, ensuring his words were recorded for the legal record. In light of the material disclosures revealed by this audit, specifically the evidence of systemic fraud, embezzlement, and gross misrepresentation of assets, Vanguard is formally exercising its right to terminate the acquisition agreement with Synthetics Global effective immediately. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a document, the merger contract, and placed it on the table. "The deal is dead," he said. "We will be filing our own suit for damages and breach of faith by the end of the business day." He turned to the FBI agents. "We will fully cooperate with your investigation. We were lied to, just like everyone else." Julian, still pinned to the floor, let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. The $1.2 billion, the money he had sold me for, the money he had destroyed our marriage for, had just evaporated into thin air. He had sold his soul, and the check had bounced. I sat back down in the chair. I placed my hands on my lap. The screen continued to scroll. A waterfall of truth washing away the lies of the last decade. I looked down at Julian. He twisted his neck to look at me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "You burned it all down." I leaned forward, my face hovering just inches from his. "No." "Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper, intimate and cold. "I did not burn it down. I just turned on the lights. You are the one who filled the room with trash." I looked at the camera one last time. "Stream over," I said. I reached out and pressed the enter key again. The screen went black. The show was finished. The mechanic had fixed the engine, only to prove that the car was stolen. The silence that followed the blackout of the screen was not empty. It was heavy with the impending roar of a landslide. I had told Sarah, the tech journalist, to stream the event, but I had not anticipated the sheer velocity of the reaction. We were living in an age where information traveled at the speed of light. But scandal traveled even faster. The moment the shadow ledger appeared on that screen, revealing the Cayman Island transfers and the systemic embezzlement. The signal had been beamed to millions of devices. The tech blog livestream had gone viral within seconds, shared by day traders, financial analysts, and schadenfreude-hungry onlookers across the globe. I stood up from the chair, my knees feeling surprisingly steady. The room was no longer a conference hall. It was a crime scene. Agent Miller did not need to wait for orders from headquarters. The evidence was irrefutable, broadcast in high definition, and stamped with the digital fingerprints of the man writhing on the floor. He hauled Julian to his feet. Julian was not fighting anymore. He was limp, his face a mask of shock that was rapidly dissolving into terror. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement," Miller recited, his voice cutting through the room like a serrated knife. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Julian blinked, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a lawyer, looking for anyone who would tell him this was just a bad dream. But the nightmare was just beginning. Down on the trading floor, the chaos had mutated into panic. I could hear it even through the soundproof glass. It was a low rumble that grew into a shout. The market had reacted. The algorithm might have been asleep, but the human traders were very much awake, and they were hitting the sell button with the desperation of rats fleeing a sinking ship. I walked over to the window and looked down at the street. It was chaos. News vans were swarming the entrance like hornets. The representative from Vanguard checked his tablet and looked up, his face pale. "The stock just halted," he announced, his voice trembling. "It triggered the circuit breaker. We are down 40% in 3 minutes. 40% was a catastrophe. But it was only the first domino. When the trading resumed 5 minutes later, the bottom fell out of the world. The footage of Julian being handcuffed had hit the major networks. The realization that the company's assets were fictional spread like wildfire. 50%, 60%, 70%. In less than 1 hour. The market capitalization of Synthetics Global, the empire that Julian had built on my back, had been reduced to the value of the furniture in the lobby. $1.2 billion of perceived value vanished, exposing the rot underneath. I turned back to Julian. He was pressed against the wall, his hands cuffed behind his back. He looked at me, and for the first time in our marriage, he did not look down on me. He looked at me with the terrified realization that I was a giant. "Why?" he croaked. tears mixing with the sweat on his face. Why burn it all? We could have been rich. We could have fixed it. I walked up to him. I reached out and adjusted his tie, which had become crooked during the struggle. It was an intimate gesture, one I had performed 1,000 times before he went to work, but now it felt like an autopsy procedure. I did not burn it. "Julian," I said, my voice calm and devoid of anger. "I just opened the curtains." I stepped back, dusting off my hands as if I had just taken out the trash. "You wanted the company so badly," I continued. "You wanted my name off the door. You wanted full control. Well, congratulations. It is all yours. You own 100% of the wreckage. You own the lawsuits. You own the debt. You own the shame." I leaned in closer. "And since I signed those termination papers yesterday, I am just a creditor. And I believe the line of people waiting to sue you starts right behind the FBI. Just then, Agent Miller's radio crackled to life. It was a dispatcher. The voice tinny but audible in the tense silence of the room. "Dispatch to Miller. We have a situation at the Thorpe penthouse on 5th Avenue. Patrol units responded to a call from the doorman. We have a female suspect in custody, identified as Sienna Miller. She was attempting to leave the premises with 3 suitcases full of watches, jewelry, and loose cash." Julian's head snapped up. Sienna. His 22-year-old mistress, the woman he had toasted with champagne less than 24 hours ago, the woman who was wearing my necklace. She was looting the place, the dispatcher continued. "We found her trying to stuff a Patek Philippe watch into her boot. She is screaming that Mr. Thorpe told her to secure the assets." Julian closed his eyes and let out a low moan of pure defeat. The betrayal was absolute. The woman he had discarded me for had not even waited for his body to get cold before she started stripping the carcass. I watched the realization crush him. He had sacrificed a woman who would have died for him for a woman who was currently robbing him. It was a poetic justice so sharp it almost drew blood. A groan from the corner of the room drew my attention. Victoria Thorpe was stirring. She sat up, her perfect hair disheveled, her makeup smeared. She looked around, blinking, trying to piece together the shattered reality. She saw Julian in handcuffs. She saw the FBI. She saw the screens displaying the financial ruin of her family. And then she saw me. Her instinct for survival kicked in. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the run in her stocking, and rushed toward me. She did not attack this time. She grabbed my arm, her grip desperate and claw-like. "Helena," she gasped, her voice shrill with panic. "Helena, darling, please, you have to stop this. You have to tell them it was a mistake. He is your husband. We are family." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, the hand that had pushed me away for a decade, the hand that had waved me off as staff at dinner parties. "Family?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yesterday, I was a mentally unstable liability. Yesterday, I was a parasite." "We were angry," Victoria cried, tears streaming down her face. It was the stress. "But you know we love you. You know Julian loves you. Look at him. They are going to take him to prison. You cannot let that happen. You are the only one who can fix the code. You can hide the data. Please, Helena, for the sake of the years we spent together, I will give you anything. I will give you my shares. I will give you the house in the Hamptons." I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my arm. I reached into the pocket of my cheap thrift store blazer. I pulled out a small white rectangular card. It was not a business card. It was a card I had picked up weeks ago, anticipating that this day might come. Though I had never expected to use it quite like this, I pressed the card into Victoria's trembling hand. "I do not want your house, Victoria," I said, "and I certainly do not want your shares. They are worth less than the paper this card is printed on." She looked down at the card. It was the contact information for a high-profile divorce attorney, one who specialized in asset recovery for spouses of convicted felons. "You might want to call him," I suggested coldly. "If you hurry, you might be able to divorce Julian and salvage some of your own assets before the government seizes everything under the RICO Act. But I doubt it. You were the chairman of the board. Victoria, you signed off on those audits too. Victoria stared at the card, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The realization hit her. She was not just a bystander. She was an accomplice. She was not going to the Hamptons. She was likely going to the cell next to her son. I turned away from her, leaving her standing in the ruin of her own arrogance. I walked toward the door. The FBI agents were beginning to escort Julian out. He was struggling now, shouting, his composure completely gone. "It was her!" Julian screamed, pointing his chin at me because his hands were bound. "She set me up. She is the genius. I am just the face. I did not know how the code worked. I am innocent." He was blaming everyone. He blamed me. He blamed the accountants. He blamed the market. He was a narcissist to the bitter end, incapable of accepting that the face in the mirror was the face of the villain. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed. It was not a threat. It was an email, then another, then a text. I pulled it out. It was a message from the former head of engineering, a man named David, whom Julian had fired 3 months ago because David had asked too many questions about the Cayman accounts. Subject: Justice. Message: Helena. We are watching the stream. We are crying. Thank you. I have the old server logs on a backup drive I saved before I left. I am sending them to the FBI right now. They prove you were locked out of the financial decisions for 2 years. We have your back. Then another message from the former CFO, a woman Julian had bullied into resignation. Message: I am ready to testify. I kept the emails where he ordered me to falsify the revenue projections. You are not alone. Helena, the floodgates had opened. The people Julian had stepped on, the people he had silenced, were rising up. My performance had not just exposed a crime, it had rallied an army. I was no longer the crazy ex-wife. I was the whistleblower. I was the architect who had built a machine so honest it refused to work for a liar. I walked to the elevator. The ride down was smooth. The silence in the car was a stark contrast to the cacophony upstairs. I watched the numbers count down: 40, 30, 20, 10, ground. When the doors opened, the lobby was a frenzy, but it was different from the morning. The fear was gone. The employees who were huddled near the reception desk looked at me, and they didn't look away. They looked at me with awe. I walked past the security guards. One of them, the older man who had worked the night shift for years, gave me a subtle nod. He touched the brim of his cap. "Have a good afternoon, Ms. Briarwood," he said. I smiled. It was the first real smile I had felt on my face in years. "Thank you," I replied. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk of Wall Street. The air was crisp and smelled of exhaust and hot dog carts. But to me, it smelled like freedom. The paparazzi were there, a wall of flashing lights, but they were pushed back by the police who were creating a corridor for the FBI agents bringing Julian out. I stopped and watched. Julian was dragged out of the building. He was not walking tall. He was hunched, his expensive suit rumpled, his face red and wet with tears and sweat. He was screaming at the cameras, screaming at the sky. "I am Julian Thorpe. You cannot do this to me. I am a visionary." The camera flashes popped like strobes, capturing his disgrace in brutal detail. He was shoved into the back of a black SUV. The door slammed shut, cutting off his screams. I stood there for a moment, watching the car pull away, sirens wailing. The man who had sold me for $1.2 billion was now property of the state. The empire he had tried to steal was dust. A reporter thrust a microphone in my face. "Ms. Briarwood, Ms. Briarwood, how do you feel? Do you have a statement? What happens to the code now?" I looked at the reporter. I looked at the building behind me, the glass tower that had been my prison. I took a deep breath. "The code is open source now," I said, my voice clear and strong. "What about the money?" the reporter asked. "You lost everything too." I laughed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. I did not lose anything that mattered. I said, "I lost 180 pounds of dead weight and a name that never fit me." I turned and began to walk away, blending into the crowd of New York. I did not look back. I did not have a car waiting. I did not have a penthouse to go to. I had a studio apartment in Queens and a checking account that was running low. But as I walked down the street, feeling the rhythm of the city beneath my feet, I realized I was richer than I had ever been. I had my mind. I had my dignity. And for the first time in 10 years, the only heart beating in my chest was my own. I was Helena Briarwood, and I was just getting started. The criminal proceedings against Julian Thorpe were a chaotic, televised spectacle of flashing lights and shouting reporters. But the real war, the war for the soul of the machine, was fought in the quiet, antiseptic stillness of the Southern District of New York Civil Court. It had been 3 weeks since the arrest. Julian was currently being held without bail at the Metropolitan Detention Center, trading his bespoke suits for an orange jumpsuit that did nothing for his complexion. But while Julian was rotting, the remaining board of directors of Synthetics Global was still kicking. They were desperate. They were like a decapitated snake that does not realize it is dead, still thrashing and biting at anything that moved. They had sued me. It was an audacious move. They filed an emergency motion claiming that Core X, the algorithm that had exposed their crimes, was nonetheless the proprietary property of the company. Their argument was standard corporate brutality. I was an employee. Therefore, anything I created belonged to them. They argued that even if Julian was a criminal, the company was a separate legal entity with a fiduciary duty to its creditors. They wanted the court to force me to turn over the encryption keys and the source code so they could sell it to the highest bidder, likely a rival bank, to pay off the massive debts Julian had accrued. The courtroom was packed, not with the general public, but with the sharks, lawyers for Vanguard, lawyers for the SEC, and the grim-faced remnants of the Synthetics Board. Victoria Thorpe was there, sitting in the back row, looking 10 years older than she had a month ago. She had not been charged yet, but her assets were frozen, and her eyes held the hollow look of a woman who knows the reaper is coming. The lawyer for the board was a man named Mr. Lasky. He was one of those attorneys who charged $1,000 an hour to destroy lives. He stood before the judge, a stern woman named Judge Patterson, who had a reputation for suffering no fools. "Your Honor," Mr. Lasky began, adjusting his cufflinks. "The facts are indisputable. Mrs. Briarwood, formerly Mrs. Thorpe, was employed as the Chief Technology Officer of Synthetics Global for 5 years. During that time, and during the tenure of her marriage to the CEO, she developed the software known as Core X, under the work-for-hire doctrine of the Copyright Act, and under the specific terms of her employment contract. That code belongs to Synthetics Global. The fact that the CEO utilized it improperly does not negate the company's ownership. We are asking the court to order the immediate surrender of the Genesis code to the court-appointed receiver." It was a solid argument. On paper, they were right. If I had written Core X while sitting in that glass office, collecting a paycheck, they would own it. But Mr. Lasky made the same mistake Julian had made. He assumed that my life began the day I met his client, when it was my turn to speak. I did not stand up immediately. I shuffled the papers on my desk. I took a sip of water. I let the silence stretch until Mr. Lasky shifted uncomfortably in his Italian loafers. I walked to the podium. I was not wearing a power suit. I was wearing a simple black dress and the same flats I had worn to the library. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady, "the plaintiff makes a compelling argument. If Core X were indeed created during my employment at Synthetics Global, they would be correct." I paused, looking directly at the board members sitting behind Mr. Lasky. However, the software currently installed on the synthetic servers, the software they are trying to claim, is not the original source code. It is merely a licensed implementation, a beta version, if you will. Mr. Lasky scoffed loudly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is semantics. The witness is trying to split hairs." "Overruled," Judge Patterson said, looking at me over her reading glasses. "Continue. Ms. Briarwood, where is the distinction?" I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a document. It was yellowed with age. encased in a protective plastic sleeve. I would like to enter into Evidence Defense Exhibit A, I said, handing the document to the bailiff. The bailiff walked it over to the judge. Judge Patterson took it, her eyes scanning the text. Her eyebrows shot up. This is a copyright registration from the United States Library of Congress. I explained to the room. Dated October 14th, 2016. The room murmured. 2016. That was 10 years ago. That was 2 years before I met Julian Thorpe, 3 years before Synthetics Global was even a concept on a napkin. Mr. Lasky looked confused. He snatched the copy the bailiff handed him. But this is registered to a Matilda Vance. Lasky stammered, "Who is Matilda Vance?" "Matilda Vance was my grandmother," I said softly. "And it was also the pseudonym I used when I first wrote the kernel for the outcome predictive engine. I was 24, Your Honor. I was a student. I did not want my professors to know I was working on a project that could theoretically dismantle the banking system, so I registered it under her maiden name. I turned to the board. The code that runs Synthetics Global is not new code. It is a derivative work. It is a shell built on top of the Vance engine. And when I joined the company, I did not assign the rights of the Vance engine to Synthetics. I could not, because technically, Matilda Vance owned it." Lasky was flipping through the pages frantically. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You cannot just claim you are a different person. Even if you wrote the engine earlier, you allowed the company to use it. That implies an indefinite license." I smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who has just heard the trap snap shut. "I did allow the company to use it. Mr. Lasky, I granted Synthetics Global a revocable, non-exclusive license to use the Vance engine. It was a standard open-source agreement, similar to the MIT license, but with one very specific addition." I pointed to the document in the judge's hand. "Your Honor, if you would please read Clause 7. Paragraph 3. Judge Patterson cleared her throat. The courtroom went silent. The Moral Integrity and Legal Compliance Clause. The judge read aloud. "This license is granted conditionally upon the licensee remaining in good standing with all federal and state laws. In the event that the licensee, or any of its principal officers, is indicted for, convicted of, or admits to any felony involving financial fraud, money laundering, or theft, this license is automatically and immediately revoked." The judge paused, looking up at Mr. Lasky. "Upon revocation, all rights to use, display, or modify the software shall revert immediately to the licensor, and the licensee must purge all copies of the software from their servers within 24 hours. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Lasky turned pale. He looked back at his clients. The board members looked sick. They had built a skyscraper on rented land, and the landlord had just evicted them for running a meth lab in the basement. "Your Honor," Lasky shouted, his voice cracking, "this is an ambush. Julian Thorpe has not been convicted yet. He has only been charged." I leaned into the microphone. The clause says indicted. "Mr. Lasky, Julian was indicted on 14 counts of federal fraud yesterday morning. And furthermore, the clause applies to the licensee itself. By filing false reports to the SEC, which is a matter of public record as of my live stream 3 days ago, Synthetics Global as an entity has violated the terms of the agreement." I looked at the judge. "The contract is self-executing, Your Honor. The moment the FBI put handcuffs on Julian Thorpe, the license died. Synthetics Global does not own Core X. They are currently in possession of stolen property. I am simply asking for it back." Judge Patterson sat back in her chair. She looked at the copyright registration. She looked at the indictment papers. She looked at Mr. Lasky, who was wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief that cost more than my car. "This seems fairly cut and dried." "Mr. Lasky," the judge said, her voice dry. "Your client built a business model dependent on a third-party software license that contained a bad actor clause. Your client then proceeded to become a very bad actor." "But, Your Honor," Lasky pleaded, "if you rule this way, the company has no assets. Intellectual property is the only thing of value. Without the code, Synthetics Global is worth nothing. It is just office furniture and liabilities." I stepped forward. That is correct, I said coldly. It is a $1.2 billion empty shell, just like my husband said I was. I turned to face the room. They wanted to sell my mind to pay for their crimes. They cannot. The code is mine. It was mine before I met Julian, and it is mine now that he is gone. Mr. Lasky slumped. He knew it was over. The board members were whispering furiously, likely discussing bankruptcy protection and how to avoid prison themselves. Judge Patterson picked up her gavel. The court finds in favor of the defendant, Ms. Briarwood. The copyright registration dated 2016 is valid. The licensing agreement is valid. The revocation clause is valid. She looked down at the board. Synthetics Global is hereby ordered to cease and desist all use of the Core X software and the underlying Vance engine immediately. You have 24 hours to purge the systems, under the supervision of a court-appointed technical monitor. Failure to do so will result in further contempt charges. She slammed the gavel down. The sound was like a thunderclap, signaling the end of the storm. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted into noise. Reporters were sprinting for the doors. The board members were shouting at Lasky. I stood still for a moment, gathering my papers. I placed the yellowed copyright document back into its plastic sleeve. It was just a piece of paper. Really. But it was also a shield I had forged 10 years ago, unknowing that one day it would save my life. I walked toward the exit. As I passed the aisle where Victoria Thorpe was sitting, she looked up at me. She was crying, silent, ugly tears that ruined her mascara. You knew, she whispered. Her voice was trembling. You knew all along. You let us build it up. You let us think we owned it. I stopped. I looked down at her. I did not let you do anything. Victoria, you took it. You took it because you thought I was too weak to stop you. You thought I was just the help. You forgot that the help usually has the keys to the back door. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I have nothing. She wept. They are taking the house. They are taking the pension. I have nothing left. I looked at her without pity. You have your health. Victoria, I said, echoing the words Julian had used on me at the party. Maybe you should focus on that. I walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway. The marble floors echoed with the footsteps of lawyers rushing to file bankruptcy petitions. Synthetics Global was dead. The stock was at zero. The creditors would descend like locusts, picking the bones clean, but they would find no meat. The brain of the company was walking out the front door in a pair of sensible flats. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the New York afternoon. The sun was shining. The air was cool. I took a deep breath. It tasted sweet. I was 34 years old. I was divorced. I was unemployed. I had a checking account that was slowly dwindling. But as I stood on the steps, watching the city move and breathe around me, I felt a lightness I had not felt in a decade. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the terminal app, the one linked to the decentralized blockchain where the Genesis code lived. Status: secure. Owner: H. Briarwood. License: revoked. I smiled. I keyed in a new command. It was not a command to destroy, nor a command to hide. It was a command to begin. Initiate project, Phoenix. The screen blinked a confirmation. I put the phone back in my pocket and walked down the stairs, merging into the crowd. I was no longer the wife of a billionaire. I was no longer the victim of a scandal. I was the architect, and I had a lot of work to do. 3 months is a lifetime in the city that never sleeps. In the high-speed world of finance, where fortunes are made in microseconds, 3 months is an epic. The scandal that had consumed the headlines, the trial of the century that saw the fall of the Thorpe dynasty, had slowly begun to migrate from the front page of the New York Times to the business editorials, and finally to the retrospective columns of history. Julian was still making news. Of course, his face, once bronzed and arrogant, now looked gaunt and pale in the courtroom sketches. The district attorney was relentless. They were pushing for the maximum sentence, 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The man who had tried to sell my mind for $1.2 billion was now negotiating for a plea deal that might allow him to see the sun before he turned 50. I did not follow the trial. I did not watch the nightly news segments where pundits analyzed his downfall. To me, Julian Thorpe was no longer a person. He was a glitch I had patched out of my operating system. I was busy building something new. I stood in the center of a converted warehouse in the Navy Yard in Brooklyn. It was a far cry from the polished marble and glass of the Synthetics global headquarters in Manhattan. The floors here were polished concrete, scuffed by decades of industrial work. The windows were massive, steel-framed grids that let in the raw, unfiltered light of the East River. There were no executive suites. There were no corner offices. There was just one massive open space filled with desks, whiteboards, and the hum of servers that we owned, controlled, and protected ourselves. Welcome to Aegis Labs. It was not just a company, it was a manifesto written in code. When I decided to restart, I made a promise to myself. I would never again build a tool that could be weaponized by a single tyrant. I would never again allow the fruit of my labor to be consolidated into the hands of a board of directors who cared more about quarterly earnings than ethical compliance. I looked across the room. David, the former head of engineering who had sent me the backup logs that saved my life, was sitting at a pod of desks, laughing with a group of junior developers. He saw me looking and raised a coffee mug in a silent toast. He was not my employee, in the traditional sense. None of them were. Aegis Labs was structured as a decentralized autonomous organization, or a DAO. It was a radical concept for a financial tech firm, but it was the only structure I trusted. Every engineer, every designer, every person who contributed code or value to the project held governance tokens. We did not have shares. We had voting rights encoded on the blockchain. Decisions were not made behind closed doors by a family dynasty. They were made transparently, through smart contracts that required consensus. If I wanted to change the direction of the company, I had to convince the team, not command them. It was chaotic. It was messy. It was loud. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever been a part of. A knock on the heavy metal door frame interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a man standing there, looking out of place in his bespoke Italian suit against the backdrop of our exposed brick walls. It was Elias Vane, the senior partner from Vanguard, the man who had almost bought the empty shell of Synthetics. "Ms. Briarwood," he said, stepping into the room with a hesitation that was entirely new. "Or is it just Helena now?" "Helena is fine." "Elias," I said, walking over to meet him. I did not offer him a seat, mostly because we did not have a guest waiting area. We had a ping-pong table and a stack of beanbags. He looked around the warehouse, his nose twitching slightly at the smell of ozone and strong coffee. "This is industrious," he noted diplomatically. "It is real," I replied. "What can I do for you?" "Elias, I assume you did not come all the way to Brooklyn to admire the architecture." He chuckled, a dry sound. "No, I came to talk business. I have been following the beta tests of your new protocol, the Phoenix engine. The chatter on the street is that it is faster than Core X, more stable, and significantly more transparent." "It is," I said simply, "because it does not have to spend processing power hiding lies." Elias nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of a subpoena or a threat, he pulled out a tablet. "Vanguard wants in. Helena, we made a mistake with Julian. We were blinded by the flash and missed the substance, but we know where the talent lies now. We are prepared to offer a seed round of $50 million for a 20% equity stake in Aegis Labs. We will let you run it, no interference. We just want a seat at the table. $50 million. It was a staggering amount of money. It was enough to buy better equipment, to hire more staff, to move into a nicer office. It was the kind of validation that every startup founder dreams of. I looked at Elias. I saw the respect in his eyes. It was genuine. He was not looking at a housewife anymore. He was looking at a titan. But he was still looking at me through the lens of the old world. He thought everything was for sale if the price was right. I smiled. And it was a gentle smile. I appreciate the offer. Elias, truly, and I appreciate that you came here yourself to make it. I gestured to the room, to David, to the young coders, to the screens displaying the live heartbeat of our decentralized network. But Aegis Labs is not for sale. We are not issuing equity. We are self-funded through the token generation event. Every person in this room owns a piece of the protocol. If we take your money, we take your masters, and we are done with masters. Elias frowned. Helena, be reasonable. You need capital to scale. You cannot fight the big banks with just ideals. You need a war chest. You need a kingmaker. I shook my head slowly. That is where you are wrong. Elias, I looked him dead in the eye, my voice steady and iron hard. I do not need a king. I am building the kingdom myself. Elias held my gaze for a long moment. He was a businessman, a creature of profit and loss. He calculated the odds. And then, surprisingly, he smiled. He put the tablet back in his pocket. I had a feeling you would say that, he admitted. Well, if you ever decide to sell a license to the software, give me the first call that we can discuss. I agreed. He shook my hand. And this time, the grip was equal. He walked out of the warehouse, leaving me standing in the kingdom I was building brick by digital brick. Later that evening, I left the office to grab a sandwich. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the cobblestone streets of Dumbo. I decided to stop at a small grocery store on the corner to pick up a bottle of water. The bell chimed as I walked in. The store was quiet, smelling of spices and fresh produce. I walked to the cooler in the back. As I reached for a bottle of sparkling water, I saw a woman stocking the dairy shelf. She was wearing a green apron over a gray uniform that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair, once dyed a perfect platinum blonde and styled into a helmet of authority, was now pulled back in a messy bun, showing streaks of gray at the roots. She was placing cartons of milk onto the rack with a slow, mechanical rhythm. It was Victoria Thorpe. I froze for a second. The last time I had seen her, she was screaming at me in a courtroom, begging for me to save her assets. Now, she was checking expiration dates on yogurt. The mighty had not just fallen, they had crashed. The government had seized the Hamptons house. They had seized the penthouse. They had seized the accounts. Victoria, who had never worked a day in her life, who had sneered at the concept of labor, was now surviving on minimum wage to pay off the civil judgments levied against her for her role in the board's negligence. She turned around to grab another crate of milk and saw me. She froze. The carton of milk in her hand trembled. Her eyes widened, filled with a sudden, sharp shame. She looked at my clothes. Simple, professional, clean. She looked at my face, which was calm and healthy. She waited. She waited for me to say something. She expected me to laugh. She expected me to pull out my phone and take a picture to post online. She expected me to gloat, to revel in the absolute destruction of the woman who had made my life a misery for a decade. I looked at her. I saw the lines of exhaustion on her face. I saw the fear. And I realized that I felt absolutely nothing. I did not feel hate. I did not feel pity. I did not feel triumph. She was just a stranger stocking milk. She was a background character in a scene that was no longer about her. I nodded, a brief, polite acknowledgement of her existence. Then I turned, walked to the counter, paid for my water, and walked out. I did not look back. To stop and mock her would have been to admit that she still held power over my emotions. Walking away without a word was the loudest statement I could make. Her punishment was not my problem. Her life was no longer my concern. Indifference, I realized, was the ultimate revenge. I walked back to the office. The sun had gone down, and the city lights were flickering to life across the river. Manhattan stood tall and glittering, a monument to ambition. But I preferred the view from Brooklyn. It felt grounded. I climbed the stairs to the loft where my desk sat. The office was empty now, save for the blinking lights of the servers. It was quiet, peaceful. I sat down in my chair. I opened my laptop, The screen glowed in the semi-darkness. I looked at my hands resting on the keyboard. For 10 years, I had worn a heavy diamond on my left ring finger. It had been a symbol of ownership, a cold stone that weighed down my hand and my heart. Now, that finger was bare, but on my right index finger, I wore a new ring. It was made of black titanium, sleek and matte. It was not jewelry, it was a piece of hardware. Inside the ring was a cryptographic security chip, a cold storage wallet, and a biometric authenticator. It held the private keys to the Aegis protocol. It held my identity. It held my freedom. I tapped the ring against the sensor on my laptop. The screen flashed green. Biometric scan complete. Welcome. Architect. I smiled at the words. Architect, not wife, not support staff, not victim, architect. I opened the command terminal. The cursor blinked, a rhythmic pulse waiting for my command. I was 34 years old. I had lost a fortune, but I had gained a future. I had walked through the fire of betrayal and legal warfare, and I had come out the other side not as ash, but as steel. I flexed my fingers. I began to type. It was a new project, a new algorithm, something that would ensure that talent could never be stolen, that attribution could never be erased, and that value would always flow back to the creator. The keys clicked in the quiet room, a steady, rapid-fire sound like rain on a tin roof. It was the music of creation. Function init, underscore Genesis, underscore block parents timestamp, equals now semicolon creator, equals Helena, underscore Briarwood, semicolon integrity, equals immutable semicolon. I hit enter. The code compiled. The program began to run. The world was waiting. And this time, I was writing the rules. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a long journey from the shadows of that basement to the sunlight of independence, and I'm so grateful you stayed with me until the very end. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy subway in Tokyo, a quiet room in London, or maybe a coffee shop in Brazil? Please leave a comment down below and let me know where you are hearing this story. I love reading about our global community. If you enjoyed this journey of revenge and redemption, please make sure to subscribe to the Sweet Rose Drama channel so you never miss an episode. Hit that like button if you think Julian got what he deserved. And please, smash that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need to hear that it is never too late to take back your power. Until next time, keep writing your own code.